It was shaping up to be a peaceful Saturday afternoon. Sunlight dappled through the oaks lining our street, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung in the air. I had just finished arranging the chairs around my backyard garden, preparing for a small gathering with two very important guests, my brother, a local city council member, and a retired federal inspector who had once overseen some of the toughest HOA investigations in the state. They were coming to see the new landscaping project I'd been working on for months. A quiet celebration, a chance to breathe after the weeks of tension with our neighborhood HOA. But as I carried a tray of lemonade toward the gate, I noticed a familiar figure striding down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, pink blazer glowing under the afternoon sun, curls bouncing with every step. HOA Karen, the self-proclaimed ruler of our cul-de-sac. She had already made a career of harassing neighbors over trivial violations: a crooked flower pot, a slightly overgrown hedge, an unapproved birdhouse. I had endured her screaming matches before, watched as she threatened fines and legal action. But today felt different. Today, she was on a mission. Before I could set the tray down, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Karen had parked her oversized sedan directly in front of my backyard gate, blocking the entrance entirely. She stepped out, clipboard raised like a badge of authority, and called across the yard. "You're not allowed to host gatherings on your property without prior HOA approval. This is a violation. Stop what you're doing immediately." Her voice was shrill, demanding attention from everyone within earshot. A few neighbors peeked from their porches, sensing the storm brewing. I swallowed my frustration and tried to stay calm. "Karen, it's just a small private gathering. Nobody is being harmed, and it's on my property." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes flicked to the street, scanning the approach of the two cars I'd asked my guests to use. I felt a spark of hope. They would see what was happening firsthand. But Karen's expression shifted instantly. She had no idea who was arriving today. Councilman Riley's car pulled up first, followed by Inspector Matthews in his old, unassuming sedan. Karen's jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of panic behind her usual smugness. She thought this would be another one of her public intimidation stunts, but the appearance of these officials changed everything. Sheriff-level authority wasn't coming, but in our neighborhood, these two carried more weight than anyone in pink blazers and HOA clipboards. Karen marched toward the vehicles, clipboard swinging, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. "You can't park here. This is private HOA business," she barked, spinning toward me. "You're defying the rules, undermining neighborhood order, and hosting unauthorized outsiders on HOA property." Inspector Matthews stepped out of his sedan, adjusting his glasses. "Ma'am, this is a private backyard. You do not have authority to block someone's property or intimidate guests." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Outsiders? You think this gives you the right to flout my rules? I enforce order here. I make the rules. He is violating them, and I will not stand for it." Her voice was rising, and the neighbors had begun to gather, drawn to the shouting. Some filmed on their phones, some whispered nervously, but all were watching. The tension was electric. I realized Karen had underestimated the situation completely. She thought she would scare me, maybe force me into submission with threats of fines or complaints. She hadn't anticipated the councilman's stern glare and the inspector's calm, calculating presence. Karen jabbed her clipboard toward me like a weapon. "I will report this, and everyone will pay. This garden gathering is illegal, completely illegal." Councilman Riley shook his head, raising a hand. "Ma'am, calm down. You cannot obstruct someone's property or bully neighbors. Step back." Karen's lips trembled with fury, her voice escalating to a scream. She spun toward the cars, waving wildly. "I am the law here. You can't ignore me. I'll—" But before she could finish, she caught sight of a neighbor stepping forward with a camera, and I saw the first real crack in her armor. Her confidence wavered. The bluff she had built over months of petty terror was starting to crumble. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Karen was powerful, sure, but only until reality showed up at her doorstep. and reality was here. The neighbors' murmurs grew louder as Karen planted herself squarely between the garden gate and the driveway, clipboard raised like a shield. The afternoon sun glinted off her pink blazer, highlighting the fury etched across her face. Every instinct in me screamed that this would be one of her signature all-or-nothing stunts. But this time, she hadn't counted on witnesses with authority. "I'm issuing citations right now," Karen shouted, jabbing the clipboard toward my garden. "Everyone will be fined, every rule enforced, and you, her manicured finger wavered toward me, will pay for this blatant defiance." Inspector Matthews stepped forward, calm but commanding. "Karen, you are obstructing private property and threatening residents. You need to step aside, or law enforcement will intervene." Karen laughed, though it was more shrill than amused. "Law enforcement? You think you can scare me with words? This is my domain. I am in control here, and I will not be ignored." Councilman Riley sighed, glancing at the growing crowd. Families peeked from windows, children clutched phones, recording every word. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "you are creating a hazard. Step away from the driveway, now." Her glare shifted between him and me, and I could see the first real flicker of panic. She hadn't anticipated anyone pushing back so directly. Her usual intimidation tactics, shouting, looming, gesturing wildly, were ineffective against the authority of our unexpected guests. "I run this neighborhood. I decide what happens here. You can't—" But she stopped mid-sentence, noticing a neighbor pull out a camera and began live streaming. The whispers and stares multiplied. Karen's aura of invincibility, the one she wielded like a sword for months, was evaporating. Fueled by desperation, she took a step closer to Inspector Matthews. You're conspiring with him. This is harassment. You'll regret this." He stayed calm, hands raised. "Ma'am, we're not conspiring. We're enforcing basic rights. You cannot intimidate residents or block access." Karen's voice pitched higher, almost frantic now. She whirled, her curls bouncing wildly, and slammed the clipboard onto the hood of her SUV. "This vehicle isn't moving until justice is served," she shrieked. The tires squeaked against the gravel as she threw herself in front of the sedan, arms flailing. Neighbors gasped. A few stepped forward, nervous but determined to keep a safe distance. Phones recorded every second. I could feel the tension in my chest, the surreal mix of fear, relief, and anticipation. "Karen, move away," Councilman Riley barked. "This is your final warning." She ignored him. She never followed warnings. She had always assumed she was untouchable, a force no one could defy. But reality, with its calm authority, was now confronting her head-on. Suddenly, she reached into her purse and brandished a canister of pepper spray. Gasps echoed across the street. Time slowed in those moments, the neighbors frozen, our guests tense, and me bracing for disaster. Before she could deploy it, a deputy I hadn't noticed stepped forward, moving with practiced precision. In a single swift motion, he disarmed her, sending the canister clattering to the ground. Karen shrieked, flailing and clawing, but now restrained by two other deputies who had arrived as backup. The clipboard slipped from her grasp and slid across the gravel. The SUV, her symbol of dominance, was finally free to be moved. A tow truck arrived, chains rattling, as Karen continued to shout, threats tumbling from her lips in incoherent fury. "I'll sue! I'll bankrupt you all! This is illegal! You—" But nobody moved. Her tantrum, once terrifying in confidence, now seemed hollow. The crowd murmured with relief, some quietly cheering. The sheriff's calm voice carried over the scene, confirming that the law was firmly on the side of residents and reality. Finally, Karen was led away, still screaming, still flailing, her pink blazer a blur of chaos against the orderly backdrop of the cul-de-sac. The tow truck hauled her SUV down the street, the chains rattling like the final note in a long, exhausting symphony of her tyranny. I exhaled, shoulders sagging. Inspector Matthews shook his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Councilman Riley clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You weren't exaggerating.
This HOA situation is worse than I imagined. Neighbors began to gather, some cautiously, others emboldened, sharing whispers and laughter, recounting what they had witnessed. The once tense cul-de-sac was now alive with quiet camaraderie. Karen's reign of terror, for all its theatrics, was over. For now. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, one truth was clear. Entitlement might roar, but it cannot withstand law, unity, and truth. And for the first time in years, our street felt like home again. Not under the rule of pink blazers and clipboards, but in the hands of neighbors finally free to breathe.